But the worst enemy you can meet will always be yourself.
Yeah. What is the bond market telling us? Look, the US has 30% holding of treasuries by foreign governments. And with, unfortunately, the way they have gone and kind of rubbed all governments of the world the wrong way, do you think 30% of all the refinancing which is coming up over the next 12, 15 months is going to be attractive to foreigners to come in? At 4.5%, maybe you'll be tempted, but then you'll think, what if this guy confiscates my holding of treasuries? Yeah. Because they've done that to other countries. So I don't see an alternative for the US government whenever this refinancing now starts coming up to go back to anything other than printing.
30% of US debt is going to expire, and there needs to be foreign buyers in order to put a floor underneath the bond market. But a lot of foreign buyers are concerned that their money is going to be confiscated. This has happened before. And with trade wars escalating, more and more foreign holders of U.S. debt are going to decide not to roll over the debt. And that means when it expires, they get their principal plus interest. They're not going to reinvest it in U.S. markets. And the U.S. is going to be forced to print money and actually try to control the yield curve.
You can't have kind of a forced recession in the US, which is what they need to do to crunch the current account. They need to move a lot faster on Doge to get the expenditure side down, which has not been happening at the rate one anticipated originally. Because if you get that expenditure cut and you get some of the income from this tariffs, then you have room for a giveaway, because his next game was, I will pander to my base by saying up to $150,000 no tax. And I will just put a sales tax. And therefore, only the rich buggers who are buying stuff will pay for it. So, like I said, there's so many moving parts. The world's not sitting idle while US plays the game they want. So, people have been reacting, and therefore, I think they'll get into a bit of a corner where I think this QE number, whatever infinite number which is coming, at some sense comes again, which is what gives you this inflation in hard assets and emerging markets.
So, higher yields, you think, in the US?
Well, US can print its way out.
Yeah.
And what that just means is your reserves are going to get smashed in real terms. And therefore, all the central banks for the last 2-3 years, it's not new, have been running helter-skelter to go and stock up on gold. And the gold number is still very low.
It's unusual for treasury yields to increase during a decline in the market. What this means is somebody is selling off treasuries, and as they sell off treasuries, the yields begin to spike, and this cripples the domestic economy. As yields get higher and higher, it makes borrowing and lending that much harder. It stops home building, it stops mortgage applications, it stops everything. What's going to happen is the Fed is going to have to step in and control the yield curve. They're going to have to control the bond markets, treasury market, and this is going to balloon their balance sheet by exponents, weakening the dollar. This is also why gold is pumping, because central banks and sovereign wealth funds are letting their debt roll over, and then they're reinvesting it in other safe places, which is the gold market, since it's been a monetary metal throughout history.
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize, as I have said, and a number of those other leaders have said, including G7 leaders, is that the system as we knew it is over, right? When the anchor of the system is fundamental, has done a series of measures that the U.S. has done, but also set out a series of objectives, and I'll come back to that, but set out a series of objectives that are just inconsistent with the way the system has been operating for decades, right? Basically since the fall of the Berlin Wall, intensified since then. So you recognize that that system anchored on the U.S. is over. That then leads to how do you react to it? There's partly the negotiation with the U.S., in which you've been focused on, but then it's also how do we deal with each other, which we've also touched on. In terms of what the U.S. is trying to accomplish, I think it's, go back to Peter Thiel of 10 years ago saying take Donald Trump literally and seriously, but take him literally and seriously. And they're looking to balance, where to the extent possible, to balance trade, which is not the way we think about things, but is the way the U.S. thinks about things. And you do get into odd situations like Canada, where we actually America has a trade surplus with Canada in goods. The only reason there's an overall deficit with Canada is because of basically oil imports. Well, if you don't want our oil imports, that will be a bit of a problem for a period of time because, the only other option for the refineries that take Canadian oil is Venezuela, and that's they've just banned those imports as well. So it's not, the logic isn't entirely consistent, let's put it that way. But I think at the core, recognizing this desire for more balanced trade, and so from the U.S. administration.
Mark Carney has worked for the G20, the Bank of England, he's Canada's Prime Minister. He's had quite an unusual career, which proves how juiced in he is. And these are really, really strong words coming out of his mouth by saying that the U.S. system is over. The issues that we see with trade is a direct result of the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency. This is Triffin's dilemma.
It's still very low. Historically, pre the Bretton Woods breakup in the 70s, gold used to be like 60% of people's reserves. They are probably at 15.
Much lower.
So there's big headroom to go here. The younger crowd and the non-aligned crowd may say we want to go to digital currencies, Bitcoin and others.
Central banks are loading up on gold, and this is proving the point that the U.S. system is breaking down. And as gold continues to appreciate, that is directly from central bank buying.
Well, I think that Senator Lummis has really an interesting idea with the Bitcoin Act of 2025, which I know has taken the community by storm. But here, what you would do is you'd revalue the gold certificates that we currently have at Treasury, most of which are valued, I think, around like $43 an ounce, which is,
a lot lower than what it's really worth.
Correct. Yeah. So now we're sitting at what, $3,100 an ounce, with being the price of gold. And if you took that value, what you could do is use that extra funding in order to buy more Bitcoin that could be used for the reserve. But that's just one idea. And, that's currently circulating its way through Capitol Hill, and we'll see how many co-sponsors she can get and how she can pull her colleagues on board. But we're looking at many creative ways, whether it be from tariffs, whether it be from something else. I mean, there's literally countless ways in which you can do this. And, I'll defer to, some of our members inside of the interagency working group to see what ideas they come up with inside of their own shops. But we'll look at everything. Everything's on the table. And like we've said, we want as much as we can get. So we're going to make sure that no stone is unturned as we start fleshing out some of these processes.
They're talking about financing the gold. So as gold's appreciating, they're going to leverage the gold that they have at Fort Knox. This is why we saw an audit of Fort Knox. And this is a strategy in order to make the biggest splash into crypto that they could possibly make.
70s. Gold used to be like 60% of people's reserves. They are probably at 15.
Much lower.
So there's big headroom to go here. The younger crowd and the non-aligned crowd may say we want to go to digital currencies, Bitcoin and others. China has already made its digital currency. They've made their own version of SWIFT, which has been spoken about a lot. So it's a dismantling of the old architecture and plumbing of the world, like I said. There's something we were speaking about when we were in the conference together, which Sharad Sharma puts very elegantly, that if you don't own the standards and protocols, you will not be able to build the platforms on top of them. So all you'll be doing is then playing on the application and product layer and maybe the service layer, which is where India has been traditionally playing. China has understood the game and gone down to the depth, where they are setting the new protocols and standards, whether it's for EVs or whether it's for these payment mechanisms, for industry after industry. Like they control a lot of the critical industries of the future, the critical rare earths of the future. And therefore, they've gone and built their own platforms and kept the Americans out from their walled garden. Which is why when US says we won't allow you to buy semiconductors, they can still come out with DeepSeek.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that game is still 10, 15 years behind, but that's the only way we'll have to go.
Okay,
China has created a walled garden, and they've expanded their CBDC system exponentially. And what is happening is the U.S. is embracing decentralization while China embraces centralization. Ultimately, China will fail with its project, and it will run across the same problems as the U.S. has had with the reserve currency and trust. Trust will be broken at one point, but in the shorter term future, the BSN, which is the cloud infrastructure for the CBDC project, has integrations into public chains, so into the crypto world. And what I think we will see is trading blocks continue, allies continuing to work together to create blockchain-based systems with rules baked in.
I'm using quotations here for those listening, like-minded countries, broadly like-minded countries. I think of the G7 as being pretty like-minded countries, not surprisingly. We value liberty, free speech, open markets in general. So are we going to have a relatively open system amongst ourselves? Or is it only going to be with a few countries, or is it going to be with no countries? I mean, that's kind of what to play for here. But the system won't revert to what it was previously.
One more time. We're already seeing trading blocks occur with the G7 nations as well as the BRICS nations. What's going to be a little bit different is the technological piece to this, the blockchain-based innovation mixed with AI and eventually quantum computing. The trade imbalances that we see is a direct result of Triffin's dilemma. So as the U.S. embraces digital assets, there is now mediums for nations to swap assets without going through the reserve currency. And this is both a good and bad.
What you do is you can rewrite Bretton Woods 2.0. What was Bretton Woods 1.0? It was fixing exchange rates. It was setting up the IMF. It was setting up the World Bank. Those were the conditions on the ground post-World War II. It made a lot of sense. What would we do if we had to write the Mar-a-Lago Accords right now? I think what we would do is work backwards from the question that Ezra asked and the answer that I gave. How do we create resiliency in these critical markets? Number one, a framework for that. Number two is how do we create limits for government-sponsored intervention against capital for-profit companies, many of whom are American, so that we can actually compete on a level playing field? And then number three, very simply, if you can do business in my country, why can I not do business in yours? And I'll just give you that story for 1 second. I was responsible. I was the head of every single entity of Facebook outside of the United States. I opened every market. My team and I created a framework for dominating. We figured out how to crack Brazil, India, Russia. The one market that we never could ever make a single iota of progress? Say it, Jason, with me.
Well, China, Russia.
No,
Iran.
Wrong. We won in Russia. So my point is, in every single market except one, is it that we were just lucky in 174 markets and one we were stupid? No. So I think that the Mar-a-Lago Accords, this sort of Bretton Woods 2.0, is the outcome, Ezra. It will basically use tariffs as a way to get these governments to a table and allow us to negotiate a much fairer economic quid pro quo.
We have negotiated treaties, and even the China-U.S. trade deal phase 1 was broken. Intellectual property was stolen, and that was the major part of the deal. So even if you get everybody to sit down and to agree to trade agreements, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the path that is taken. And this is why I think you saw a pivot with President Trump. He used to be anti-crypto. Now he's embracing it just like Eric Trump is. And this is very telling because this is the only technology that can embed rules in a trusted manner without trusting a third party. You can embed rules directly into the protocol.
If whatever I'm saying plays out the way I think it does, it is again a gush of money coming towards emerging markets and hard asset. It's consistent with our markets then having a holding pattern for next at least few months while we figure out what are the new assumptions to plug into our spreadsheets and so on. But post that, there should be a big breakout in emerging markets. The CRB index also looks like it's about to take off. Gold, silver, uranium, you have to go into nuclear and stuff for powering all your data centers and additional power requirements.
As the U.S. debt market sells off, yields are going to spike, and the Fed is going to have to curtail those yields by buying bonds. This is going to cause their balance sheet to balloon exponentially. As we see a contraction in globalization, we will have to rely on technologies to make each country more productive than it already is. Robotics, automation, AI. These different technologies are going to require hard assets. They're going to require precious metals. They're going to require rare earths, nuclear energy, natural gas. The list goes on. And this is where people should be positioned as wealth rushes into this new system. Not to mention, there will be different crypto protocols that are pivotal to make this system work on a grand scale. It's abnormal to see the treasury yields rise as the market is declining. Usually there is an inverse relationship because everybody rushes into bonds as a safe haven, but this is no longer so. People are not looking at bonds like safe havens anymore. They're looking towards gold and crypto as a safe haven, and this is fundamentally different. It's likely we will see a decline in the overall markets followed by exponential growth within the different sectors I've mentioned.
A very strong sense of, this is going to cost us, but we're willing to take the price to restructure our economy in a different direction. Like, it's been such a sense of, the word that's used is betrayal. So, we signed a deal, we've had this partnership, we observe it in good faith, we set up businesses, we know lots of Americans, we like Americans, we listen to American podcasts, there's such a thing. And all of a sudden, we get these attacks.
Mark Carney is describing the trade relationship with the United States as betrayal. Now, regardless of how you feel about international trade, there is validity to the statements that are made. And the million-dollar question is, how do you set up future trade agreements that you cannot go back on? Agreements that do not allow you to circumvent the agreements.
There's a risk premium in U.S. assets that wasn't there before. And the question is, how big is that risk premium going to settle? Where is it going to settle? And that, in part, is going to depend on how coherent the new system is. And does the U.S. credibly commit to a new system or a series of deals? Remember, we have a trading deal with the U.S. that was signed by the current president, and which isn't being observed. So I think that's one thing, is there's a risk premium on U.S. assets, and if there's a risk premium on U.S. assets, then the cost of all other assets around the world is greater, right? Like, since we're still priced off of U.S. Treasuries, for example. So that's one thing.
So how can the United States agree to a trade deal credibly with Canada when Canada feels betrayed? There needs to be trust baked into this, and this is where blockchain technology comes into play.
Trying to weaponize treasuries, how does the Treasury Secretary respond?
Look, we have a big toolkit. We do buybacks. The Federal Reserve, I think if treasuries hit a certain level, or if the Federal Reserve believed that a foreign, I won't call them an adversary, but a foreign rival, were weaponizing the U.S. government bond market or attempting to destabilize it for political gain, I am sure that we would do something in conjunction with each other, but we just haven't seen that.
We're at a pivotal moment in history. 30% of U.S. debt is maturing, and that means that foreign governments are going to have to choose on where to park their capital from their maturing treasury position. Under normal circumstances, foreign governments would reinvest in U.S. treasuries. But you heard from Mark Carney and others that they have to realign their economies because they have to diversify, and this is going to cause a lot of issues. You heard Scott Bessent say that this could be interpreted as economic warfare, and there will be a reaction to anyone that starts selling off U.S. Treasury positions. They can reinvest in their own bond markets, but this will cause an appreciation of their currency, which puts them at a disadvantage in international trade. Or they could let the debt mature and then they purchase neutral assets like gold and crypto. If there are no more foreign buyers of U.S. treasuries, the government is going to continue to borrow money, and the U.S. Treasury is going to issue treasuries into the treasury markets, diluting the prices. So this is where stablecoin regulations will come into play. Your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider supporting my work through Patreon.